Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Natasha Collins, LAO. The Department of Finance gave a good rundown on the background behind this proposal. The State Library conducted a needs assessment and spending plan to determine the speeds at local libraries, and they determined that the speeds were indeed slow at many libraries. They also devised a spending plan for connecting to Scenic, which is a nonprofit organization that serves many educational public educational and some private educational segments in California. This proposal would include a contract with Scenic, which would be $4.5 million annually. The governor proposes to spend $2.25 in general fund on this contract, and the rest of the contract funds would come from the California Teleconnect Fund, which is a special fund. The proposal assumes that libraries would pay for all other costs which would be associated with this proposal. If you turn to page 3 on the handout that the sergeant passed out, I'm going to skip to there since we've gotten a pretty good background and overview. You'll see a map that kind of explains how the internet would work for libraries in this situation. So we can see here something that we would call the last mile connection. The Scenic proposal does not pay for this last mile connection. It only pays for a segment of the internet. If you look under connectivity option 1 and 2, you can see the Scenic backbone is only a small part of the internet. Libraries themselves must pay all of the fees associated with connecting to that Scenic backbone. This is called the last mile connection. These connections are provided by commercial providers, such as AT&T is the most common. Scenic would only be providing the backbone, but it would be up to libraries to fund this additional cost. Our major concern with this proposal is that this proposal may not increase library speeds for many libraries. While it's laudable that fast internet speeds at libraries is an important goal, this proposal does not fulfill this. We can see in the case of schools that although schools connected to Scenic in the early 2000s, their speeds are still not much faster than schools that are not connected to Scenic currently. If you look on page 4, you can see a graph that outlines the fact that non-Scenic connected schools, which is about 15% of schools, have similar speeds to Scenic connected schools. In our conversations with K-12 schools, they told us that this is because the last mile costs are cost prohibitive in many cases, and that they lack the infrastructure to even connect them to the Scenic backbone, that basically their wires are too old and updating them would cost them far too much. Another thing that they indicated as to why schools have either stayed with their own providers and not utilized Scenic or are still not getting fast speeds is because they simply have other priorities that their general fund they like to use on other things like school supplies, staffing, and so on. In our conversations and research, we determined that this is very possible for libraries, and we found that 50% of libraries, in fact, do not have the infrastructure necessary to even access this high-speed internet if they wanted to. They would have to, in some cases, even trench to get the updated infrastructure or wires to connect to Scenic. We weren't able to get estimates on this, although we expected to get a total cost estimate. We had to refer to some cost estimates for schools, which were actually presented in an agenda before this committee earlier this month on how much it would cost for schools, although they've been connected to Scenic since the early 2000s, to get medium speeds, if all schools were to connect at medium speeds next year. And the estimate that was provided was $708 million, although we've already invested quite a lot in schools' ability. We extrapolated for libraries on how much it would cost them to, with the same determining factors which we were told we could use by K-12 high-speed network, and we determined it would be $85 million for libraries, that 50% of libraries to access these high speeds. That was our main concern, just simply that this is may not work for many libraries and would be cost prohibitive. The second was basic inadequate cost information. We received, and you can see on page 5, we outline this inadequate information. We received conflicting information as to why it would be $4.5 million to libraries to connect. It's $4.5 million annually for CSU, $4.5 for UC, $4.5 for all the community colleges, and $4.5 million annually for all of the schools. Why this fee is the same for all segments is unclear, and we've received conflicting information on this. The proposal also does not address what would happen if the other half of the contract is not provided by the California Special Fund, California Teleconnect Special Fund. And also the proposal does not include those last mile connections that I outlined. On page 6, we give our recommendation, basically that this is not the best way to go about connecting libraries to high-speed internet access. And we recommend that the legislature focus on various other programs that we've set up over many years that are intended to help libraries and other community organizations access high speeds. One of these is a discount fund that provides libraries 50% discounts on their telecommunications fees. But we found that half of libraries don't access these discounts. So maybe the legislature could look into the state library encouraging local libraries to access these funds at a higher rate, since we already set up this program. Another would be the fact that the state library could encourage local libraries to enter into CalNet, which is a bulk purchasing agreement with commercial providers that the state has already negotiated with providers like AT&T to get the best rates possible. The third is an actual internet infrastructure fund that the state has set up. This infrastructure fund helps remote communities, rural communities, update this infrastructure. So essentially update those wires that we talked about to access higher speeds, because now it's impossible in many cases. These improvements on these existing programs could mean benefits not only for libraries but also other community organizations. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will, before we open up for questions, we'd like to hear from the representatives of the California State Library.
Well, I'm Greg Lucas, Mr. Chair. I'm the new state librarian. Thank you. I'm excited by the job. Jared Keller from the library and Jerry McGinnity can speak with more specificity to the governor's proposal. I just mainly wanted to introduce myself and to thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting Erica Braxton White of your staff show me what the governor's proposal could do for libraries like those in Torrance.
Yes.
And similarly, Assemblyman Chavez, even though Michael Haglund, I want to say, was on his sickbed, he set me up with a very nice look at a cross-section of libraries in your district, and I wanted to thank you for letting him do that for me.
I sat on the library board for 7 years.
I met with Jose Aponte down there, who said the very same thing, and wanted me to say hi for him.
Small world.
Truly. Gentlemen.
Jerry McGinnity, State Library. I just wanted to give a little background to this. You got quite a bit in this document, but public libraries were facing, the severe cutbacks that they faced from the state about 4 years ago. Plus, they were having their own issues locally with local funding. And the state library brought public libraries together on an annual basis on a forum to start to look at these issues and what did they consider areas that the state could help out given the situation they were in. And in 2000, we met the first time in 2011. They formed a task force that came together in 2012, and one of their top priorities was to modernize the California Library Services Act, and that did take place, and that was SB 1044, Senator Liu's bill, and that was passed in 2012, which put in some economy of scales and kind of modernize an act which had been around since 1978. The other thing that was in their priority was to create more digital content, to digitize more materials, because moving into the electronic format for data, and also the other top priority was broadband, that if they were going to move into this environment, they needed that, and it was a really strong, resounding need that all the public, almost, it was pretty much a majority of the public library directors got behind. They're behind this proposal. Tremendous amount of work that they've done. The response to this, we produced this document, the needs assessment. It's on our website. We initially got like a three-quarter response from the 180 libraries, which represent about 1,100 outlets, which shows you they're really behind us. We've subsequently, because we wanted to get this report done, we've taken more data. We're close to 98% of all the branches, data on all the branches. So it really shows you it's a need out there. They understand the challenges that are out there. The strength that they see is the consortium effort. They are doing it on an individual basis. As you know, most public libraries are a part of a city structure or county structure, and that's who they depend on. The data shows that they're not getting the speeds that they need. So the strength that they see here is this consortial effort to be part of the consortium that would push this forward. There's greater strength in that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jared, and he can talk a little bit more about some of the technical details.
Hi, Jared Keller, California State Library. This is, as Jerry pointed out, this is overwhelming. This is resonating incredibly big with our libraries. We need additional capacity. We need additional speed to our libraries. California libraries are unique. We serve all 38 million Californians. We're not like the schools where we have defined population. We serve all. As the data showed, our libraries are very poorly connected. We serve a lot of people with very little bandwidth. Not only are our overtaxed connections providing connectivity to staff, but also for the in-house computers, for the Wi-Fi connections. Just a little bit on statistics for last year. In California, we have over 20,000 PCs in our libraries. These PCs were accessed over 38 million times last year. This does not count all the additional Wi-Fi traffic that goes on in our libraries. Our libraries do a lot with very little. This is a great equalizer for us. By joining this consortium effort, we have the ability, for the first time, to be able to buy circuits in bulk, to be able to get prices down. Secondly, we have the opportunity to have another entity handle E-rate for our libraries. It was mentioned that libraries do not apply for E-rate, and why is that? E-rate is a very labor resource intensive process. In our larger systems, we have where they're using 1 to 2 PYs just to handle E-rate. And this is a very huge workload. So for much of our smaller libraries, they don't have an opportunity to apply for these additional discounts because they don't have the staff, they don't have the technical expertise to do this. Moving forward in consortium effort will allow this burden to be offloaded, and it opens up where libraries can apply for additional discounts, such as E-rate priority 1 and 2, where they can save money on ongoing costs, which can be diverted to last mile, and B, they can apply for other E-rate discounts that can be used towards last mile. So there are a lot of resources that are out there, and by moving in consortium effort, which is proposed in this report, and potentially using Scenic, could greatly benefit our libraries. Last mile is a national issue. Okay? We all have this issue throughout the United States. I was back in Washington last month testifying to the FCC about the current status of broadband connectivity in California public libraries. And they said the way that we need to move forward is through consortial efforts. John Chambers, head of FCC, said consortial efforts are the way to go. He applauded what we are trying to do here, that this is the way to move forward to try to help connect our anchor institutions. Not everyone has access. There are many people in California who do not have access, and they have to turn to our libraries. The library is the only place where they have access. If you want to apply for a job, you need online services. If you want to do research online, it's all driven this. This is the best thing for California. We need to be able to increase the speed for our libraries.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
Questions for both the library and the LAO. Can you address the LAO's question about why not CalNet? You also, I didn't hear any mention of the pilot that was already done in the peninsula, that my understanding was fairly successful in terms of pricing as well as increase in internet speed? And can you tell me, so two separate questions, which is, tell me why this program, why scenic versus some of the other options that the LAO might have mentioned, why is this superior? And I'm curious to hear more about the Peninsula pilot, which did seem to, again, cut costs in half and increase speed significantly, and why this is not, why wouldn't we be seeing this across the state?
Mr. Chair, members, Mike Dillon, representing the California Library Association. Linda Crow is here, who represents the Peninsula Library System, and maybe she can answer that question directly from Mr.
Actually,
King.
before we move into public comments, was your question directed to the Department of Finance or the State Library?
We could speak to some of it.
It was directed to both LAO and the libraries, but if the libraries would like to defer to the Peninsula libraries, that's fine. Because there was a pilot done with the Peninsula Library System that, you know, again, that's what I think pilots are for. Pilots are going to help us see, can this be rolled out statewide, and how did it go, and what were some of the pluses or minuses. So if the leader of the library system...
We could speak to that and then defer to the Peninsula Library System. We looked at the Peninsula Library System in our research, and in our conversations, we found that the Peninsula Library System had already been connected to Scenic for 5 years prior to the pilot. They had received American Recovery Act money 5 years prior to build out that really great infrastructure to access these high speeds, and had been accessing Scenic for 5 years through a community college who was already part of the consortia. So essentially they were using the service without Scenic's knowledge for that amount of time.
Thank you.
I'm Linda Crow, and I'm the Executive Director of the Peninsula Library System. And first of all, we never got any ERA money. We have paid for all of our fiber locally, so that's off the table. We have 32 connections to our libraries. We are a network that contains all the public libraries and all the community college libraries in San Mateo County. And yes, we have been part of the network at the community college district, but we have not been part of Scenic. And when we became a pilot, we separated from the community college and we have moved to our own 10 gig connection. So we were low-hanging fruit, that's true, but we were not part of Scenic, and we did not receive ERA money to do the fiber installs.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Can you just describe your experience and your connections? One of the concerns the LAO raised was the challenges with connecting to Scenic, and could you compare that challenge with, say, your previous internet service provider?
Well, if you want to talk about our fiber connections, we made the decision about 6 years ago that if we wanted to increase our speed and to be ready to upgrade, we needed to have all of our libraries have fiber to the libraries. And we worked together to use local funds to build that network. And it's been in place for quite a while. We started out recently, our highest speeds were 20 megabits. Our largest library had 20 megabits. At this point, those libraries have all gone onto the new network, have 1 gigabyte. We are paying one half of the cost. We were paying $1,475 for our speeds before. We are now paying $725 a month. So that's quite a saving, and we have 500 times the speed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chavez.
Interested in the CNEC. I was sitting here Googling them up, looking at the mission statement and everything. How big is CNEC? What's the budget for CNEC?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Dillon, again, representing the Library Association. We have the expert here. Louis Fox is the chairman or president of Scenic, so we'll get out of order here and let him jump in and answer the questions.
Sounds good.
Thank you. The annual budget of Scenic is roughly $75 million a year.
And your business model, you do what? the backbone and everything is provided by private industry. Do you lease it, then provide the connectivity?
Some of it is leased on 15 to 20-year leases. Some of it is owned. We typically light it. We run about a 4,000-mile backbone in California to which we connect University of California, Cal State universities, all the community colleges, all the K-12 county offices of education, and behind them are connected the districts and the schools. We connect a number of private universities, Stanford, Caltech, USC. We provide an intra-California service, an intranet, if you will, for all of education in California. We connect to the public internet, and we provide as much internet access as, we don't meter the internet access of any of our entities. We provide something that's called peering, which means if, for instance, you go to Google or Netflix or Yahoo, typically you go over the commercial internet to do that. We connect directly to those networks so that none of that traffic goes on the commercial internet. We do that with about 100 of the biggest networks in the country. We also run an international peering fabric, which allows us to interconnect to roughly 100 international networks that are similar to that of Scenic. We connect to Internet 2, to the Department of Energy's ESNet, and most of the major research and education networks in the United States, as well as to all the other regional networks in the United States. We provide a variety of other services that are not what you typically associate with commodity Internet, but allow our members to create special connections between one another that aren't typically available in the commercial internet. I guess the best way of thinking about this is the kind of environment that typically students have on a research university, where they are, in a sense, living in the future. They have a set of tools and they have an environment that typically you don't have at home. That's the kind of environment, living in the future, that we try and replicate at the community colleges, at the CSUs, and at K-12, and ideally now to give all citizens access to that kind of environment at public libraries.
So when was CNEC established?
It was established 1994.
And does it... The reason I'm asking this is back in 1997, I was the Chief of Staff of the 4th Marine Division Reserves, and we had a backbone that went across the entire country. We spent tens of millions of dollars, back then a lot of money, to establish a connectivity for all our military in the 48 states. And it was really cool, did a lot of neat things. But if you recall back to 1994 or 1998, we didn't use these things like we do now, and the internet and all the connectivity and how it's grown in the market. The reserves, I believe, don't have that anymore because it was much cheaper, instead of to run it, just to privatize it and let the technology grow. And so I'm wondering why we have a CNET, and I'm wondering, you know, back when, used to be when Schwarzenegger, he had the czar of information system operations, and he had a working group that was to look at breaking down all the legacy systems that we have had in the state, because it just kind of grew up. Every department was doing their own thing, so they're trying to corral it. And I don't know where it is anymore. I'm no longer on that working group. But from the LAO's perspective, looking at how technology has grown and changed and is more robust, and looking at, I sit on the Utilities Committee and seeing how I noticed our budget right now for the California Teleconnect Fund is $118 million. Is this a program that we still need to support?
Is the Teleconnect Fund a program we
No, it is the CNEC.
CNEC.
I understand the library wants that because they want it's a plug-in. They plug into them, they go do it. But do we need to do that way? Manage it that way?
So our analysis focused mostly on the library proposal, but to get to your point, CNEC evolved, as you heard, as a research network for UC, and then gradually it's been expanded. CSU community colleges, schools and now libraries. I think our point is, again, if you look at page 4 of our handout, we don't necessarily think it's been that beneficial for schools because of the last mile connection issue, which we think libraries will also face. I don't know if that's answering your question as well as it could, but we haven't really evaluated Scenic in its entirety, but we are saying don't expand it for libraries at this time.
Well, I'll just stop there because I'm just looking at it. I think this may have, we're going to spend, it's not that big of money, but I mean, we're going to spend money on this thing, but I'm wondering maybe later on we need to look at and see, is this even the best way to go? I mean, at one time I was really excited about having a VW Bug, but I wouldn't drive that anymore. And so,
and the state has looked in the past when K-12 was added to Scenic. There was both an independent outside audit, and the Bureau of State Audits also did an audit of Scenic, I think, to get at this question of should it be expanded for more entities.
Okay, thank you.
I would note that Scenic is now runs a 100 gig backbone, which makes it among the most sophisticated networks in the world. And to the point of some of the services-related education, we point with great pride to the fact that the Naval Postgraduate School is among our members. They chose to go to Scenic because of the services that we offer and because it was a less restrictive educational environment than a DOT military. We also enabled the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, which is arguably the leading language institute in the world, to ride on our network for similar reasons.
Knowing them very well, because I did contracting for some of them back in my other life, they do really good on defense language, but contracting in business is another thing. But this might be the greatest thing since sliced bread. It may be great. Mm-hmm. But I just thought I'd ask that question when I looked at it. Wondered who are they and why are they there?
And it would still be commercial providers providing most of the internet to libraries, just like they do to schools, which is why 15% of schools could maybe get faster speeds with commercial providers and why they've stuck with their commercial providers. So it makes a lot of sense if you're directly connected to the backbone like these organizations are, but libraries might be quite far away and need to pay those infrastructure costs to connect. Even if it's really fast, it doesn't matter if you can't access it.
Well, let me, following on Mr. Chavez's line of questioning to the LAO, is there a viable alternative to Scenic that would, I mean, I'm supportive of the governor's proposal, but, you know, just for the sake of, you know.
Well, I think, excuse me, I'm sorry. I think that what we spoke to a little bit earlier about the other programs that the state has set up, that rather than than a small amount of money towards this proposal, which may not benefit as many libraries as we would like, it might make more sense to focus on programs that have been set up for libraries. Mr. Keller referenced the E-rate, which is a federal program, which admittedly is very complicated and provides discounts to libraries and schools. But the state fund, which I'm sure Member Chavez is familiar with his utilities committees, is the California Teleconnect Fund, which is incredibly easy to access. In fact, you just need to be certified that you're a library and you can get a 50% discount on all your telecommunications bills. But for some reason, only half of libraries are accessing this. So maybe looking at these programs that are in place and figuring out why libraries aren't accessing them might be a viable alternative.
Let me ask the IT expert from the state library on why Scenic?
Why Scenic? Because, just a little background, I have been a network engineer now going on 18 years. So I've worked on the side of the house where we support agencies' CalNet contracts. I've actually, in the past, kind of been in competition with Scenic with other agencies that I've been in. You know, CalNet is great, but you do not always get the best prices. What's being omitted here is it's the additional services that you get through Scenic. It's the networking services. It's the design services. It's the advanced peering relationships. It is the ability to get the help with E-rate. It's the help to get the ability with Teleconnect. It's actually helping fill in those gaps that we have in the library community. That way that libraries can get what they deserve, what they need to be able to serve their communities. And as I said, having worked on both sides of the fence, you know, having supported customers with CalNet contracts and seeing that even under CalNet, you pay significantly more than if you were to go the other options. It's not always the best bet. I really feel that this is the best way to go for California public libraries.
Okay. I'd like to welcome the Budget Chair, Ms. Skinner. Thank you very much for joining us. Why don't we transition into public comments?